You know, when I made that Dead Rising 3 video, I thought that would be the last Dead Rising video I'd make for a long time, and then this happened, so now I have to talk about it. If you've been living under a rock these past couple of days, you may have missed the bombshell announcement of a Dead Rising remaster. Oh, sorry, I mean a Deluxe Remaster. Funny way of saying remake. I'm sure I wasn't the only one who was caught completely off guard when I saw that teaser trailer pop up in my recommended. A mixture of emotions came over me, before and after watching that trailer. The first Dead Rising is a game that's a big part of my life. I'm not going to admit that it's the most important thing in my life, but it's definitely up there. And after seeing the teaser trailer, I was immediately hit with a huge concern. TJ Rotolo will not be returning as Frank West. What do you mean? This revelation felt like a swift kick to the balls, and it turns out I wasn't the only one who felt this way. The main reason Frank is so memorable is because of TJ Rotolo's performance. He brings a lot of mannerisms to the character that help Frank stand out as a unique protagonist, not just in the series, but in gaming as a whole. People are already talking about modding TJ's voice back into the game when it drops. This did make me feel a bit sorry for Frank's new voice actor. Poor bastard's not even being given a chance. On top of this, we also got a look at Frank's new design. While it mostly stays true to Frank's original design, my boy desperately needs a trip to Turkey, because that hairline is receding further with every game. Apparently this is his predicted look for Dead Rising 5. We weren't given much time to stew and speculate on what could be implemented and changed for the Deluxe Remaster, because barely a few days after the teaser trailer dropped, we got a full-fledged trailer, a release date, and even in-depth analysis from some of the lovely lads who have been working on the game, which is what I want to talk about. The trailer and subsequent discussions highlighted a lot of interesting revelations, and I want to go through those points, as well as some of the things that weren't brought up, because honestly this feels like Dead Rising's last chance. If this isn't well received, I feel like that will be the final nail in the coffin for the series. No more lovable psychos, no more addictive combat, and no more overpowered orange juice. Just a void of forever yearning for a brand new Dead Rising game that will never come. It's best not to think about that. A remastered version of Dead Rising already exists, but thankfully this one is a deluxe remaster. Whereas the remaster release in the past only upped the frame rate, this remaster is completely overhauling the graphics. There's no denying the genius of the first Dead Rising. It took the gaming world by storm and paved a bright future for 7th generation console gaming. With that being said, the game is ugly. It was a creative decision, mind you. The goal was to get as many zombies in the mall as possible, and Capcom couldn't achieve that without sacrificing everyone's stellar jawlines. We've come a long way since then, and now it's possible to have a good looking game with a shit ton of zombies. And the art director of the Deluxe Remaster, Satoshi Takamatsu, made a point of discussing the game's upgraded visuals. Thanks to nearly 2 decades of technological advancements, we were able to accomplish a lot that couldn't be done back then, and he does have a point. One of the main focuses has clearly been to polish up the models and make them a lot nicer to look at. Madonna actually looks like a dog now, rather than something you'd find in an analog horror, and people's faces and clothes seem to no longer clip through each other. He then added, Resident Evil, Capcom's other zombie franchise, focused on quality over quantity, and while it's safe to say that quality hasn't always been the main focus of some Resident Evil games, I can see where he's coming from. Resident Evil games typically don't have you fighting waves of zombies. The earlier games especially were always about creating a scary atmosphere with their visuals. On top of this, enemies were few and far between, which made each encounter intense, but Dead Rising was more of a romp, but now they can really utilise the visuals of the game to make it more immersive and not just comically entertaining. Something I'd love to see, but I doubt they'll do, is use the visuals to really tap into the game's horror elements. Dead Rising has kind of become a parody of horror at this point, and the uncanny look of the original game made it a lot scarier than it was. A big emphasis has been put on zombie variety, as well as improved lighting and shadow effects. The lighting and shadow effects in particular are a nice little addition. Dead Rising is famous for its day and night cycle. Being trapped inside of a mall for 3 days, you become accustomed to all different times of day. The Super Ultra Mega Deluxe Remaster is taking this concept a step further, as the different times of day will now have an effect on how each location looks, depending on the time. The later discussion also appeared to reveal that some of the areas in the game have been slightly redesigned. From this small clip, we can see that the Paradise Plaza has had a brand new whale statue put into it. This could just be something subtle, or I'd like to think it's a teaser for some other design changes. In my Dead Rising remake video, I talked about how I would have liked to have seen a potential remake of the game add some new areas to the map. The Willamette Mall has several areas that are under construction, but obviously they never got completed because of the zombie outbreak. Now I know this isn't a remake, but if they have decided to change some of these areas stylistically, like how they've added a ramp for the brain-dead AI outside of the air duct, then it's not too far-fetched to suggest that maybe they've added some new areas into the mall, but that's probably just wishful thinking for an actual literal remake. When looking at the brand new character designs, I can't help but think that some of them look even more uncanny than they did back in 2006. A part of me really wants to like them, but another part of me thinks that they look like they've been put through the Street Fighter 6 character creation. Granted, we only got to see a handful of them, but Adam's design really rubbed me the wrong way. His wig looks like it's got a mind of its own. Plus I had to double take when I saw Larry. That ain't Larry, that must be his cousin Barry. These designs make the characters come across more silly than scary, and while this can potentially work for psychos like Kent and Steven, for Adam, Cliff, and many of the other psychos, it's going to make them feel goofy, and I always liked how disturbed they all came across in the original version. Of course, I haven't travelled through time to play the game, so I don't know yet. With any trailer that isn't completely cinematic claiming to be in-game footage, it's important that some gameplay is shown to the masses so they know what to expect, and this trailer, along with the director of the game, Ryosuke Murai, let a lot out of the bag. The original Dead Rising is notorious for being a bit janky. While combat was satisfying, movement could have been a bit smoother, and aiming with a gun was painful with a controller. On top of this, you were rooted to the floor like some sort of Counter-Strike pro trying to control this spray pattern. The Deluxe Remaster now lets you move freely when aiming a gun, and movement has been tweaked to make Frank feel less stiff. Mr. Murai labelled these changes as quality of life improvements, and that perfectly captures what these are. I love Dead Rising, but Christ, I'd be lying if it never made me want to go mental with a mini chainsaw. Making the gameplay slicker can only be a positive thing, but I can also use these updated mechanics to gatekeep against new fans. Sorry. You think this is hard? Please, have you ever played the original Dead Rising? Just go, there's the door. Dead Rising's gameplay has become iconic at this point for its mixture of killing zombies with anything you can find, partnered with a do-what-you-want kind of approach to the story, and this formula has been praised by the majority of fans. In fact, when this winning formula started to become more diluted and tweaked as the games went on, the sequels themselves fell off drastically. Then Ryosuke went on to say, if you've played the original, rest assured that its core remains unchanged in the Deluxe Remaster. Sounds very reassuring, but he said this after showing us some mechanics that in my opinion drastically changed the core elements of Dead Rising. The trailer alone only really showed us the combat. The discussion afterwards really put into perspective how much the Deluxe Remaster was going to change the formula. A big gripe many Dead Rising fans have with the first game is the AI. It's notoriously awful and is usually the source of many players' frustrations. While the game claims you don't need to save survivors, you're kind of buggered if you don't, as you need their delicious PP to level up and make Frank stronger. It seems like their behaviour has been changed, so they can pathfind and follow Frank easier, which I mean is fine with me. Saves me having to punish them with my get moving stick. All of those changes, you know, the movement, the AI, the improved combat, I'm fine with all that, but it's some of these other implementations that I'm not the biggest fan of. Capcom has decided to add an autosave feature into the Deluxe Remaster, with Ryosuke saying, thanks to popular demand, we've added an autosave feature. I had no idea this was such a talked about thing. I've never seen anyone wishing about having an autosave feature in the first Dead Rising, because that goes against what made it so fun and challenging. Dead Rising was so intense and scary to a degree because of the fear of failure aspect of the game. If you died and hadn't saved for a while, you had to load back to a previous save. This taught you to be careful and always be mindful of your stock, surroundings, and health, which made you better at the game. With an autosave feature, all of that tension is gone. Zombies aren't that scary, and psychos aren't that threatening if there isn't any real punishment for dying. This is a big reason as to why Dead Rising 3 and 4 weren't as challenging as the first two games. This again makes me think that this iteration of Dead Rising is leaning away from the horror elements the original had, which I can't say I'm too happy about. Another change that really rubbed me the wrong way was the ability to time skip. This element wasn't even talked about by the director, it was just briefly shown over him discussing something else.
You sneaky little sausage.
And to me this seems like such an anti-Dead Rising mechanic to include. Dead Rising works on a case-to-case basis. These cases eventually expire if you don't complete them in time. This means time in between these cases is usually used to do extra stuff, like look around the mall for hidden survivors, complete scoops, or beat the shit out of every zombie you see. Every second counts in a game like this, so why have it so players can just skip time? To me that just seems like it's telling new players that scoops aren't that important, when in fact they are some of the best elements of Dead Rising. Think about all of the interactions people might potentially miss, because they decided to travel through time, like Snake smoking a joint. I've given my opinion on things that have been confirmed to be coming to Dead Rising, Rising Deluxe Remaster. Now I want to close off the video with what I hope to see in this game. I'm literally on my knees begging to whichever god is listening that Capcom hasn't changed any of the music for the game. Dead Rising's soundtrack is recognisable for its large variety of kick-ass boss themes and its eerie scores, and it would be a shame to lose any of those tracks. Since they're recasting Frank, they've probably recast everyone else. Since this is the case, why not add dialogue where there was none before? Like when talking to survivors, instead of having Frank make random noises, he can now fully articulate himself.
I got sober for you.
And so can the survivors, instead of just saying,
"Son of a bitch!"
and who can forget?
Get away from me!
If they're going for a more immersive approach, then this is definitely something they should have considered. Since they've slightly redesigned some parts of the mall, it would be cool to see more stores with different weapons for Frank to use, maybe even add in some cut content, or even challenges and game modes, like Infinite Mode. I was keeping my fingers crossed for co-op, but that's not happening. With the improved AI, it would have been a cool addition to change up some of the psychopath behaviours. Some of the boss fights in Dead Rising are far too easy, so changing the way they behave and attack would keep even veteran players on their toes like they're playing it for the very first time again. I've not been this excited and worried about a game release in a long time. Dead Rising is a series that many people like myself can never forget, and we had all thought that Capcom had seemingly abandoned it for good, yet now it feels like the series has been given a second chance to make things right. You could say it's only a remaster, but this could end up being one of the most important games in the franchise if A, it sells well, and B, is actually a really good game. Surely that means we'll finally get to see the next installment in the Dead Rising saga after so many years, that elusive Dead Rising 5. September isn't too far away, and right now all we can do is pray that a shitty game isn't waiting for us when it finally arrives. Oh, and hopefully Otis isn't in the game.